Good morning and welcome to our UU Holton Sunday Service Online Edition, coming to you from the Unitarian Parlor in Holton, Maine. Today is the 5th Sunday of Lent, as we are inching closer towards Easter Sunday, only 2 weeks away. And we also continue with part 9 of our series on belonging, a summary of takeaways on how we can all assist in creating belonging. It's a snowy day here in Holton, Maine, and we appreciate those of you who trudged through the snow to get here. And we also welcome those of you who happen to be viewing from home or on your portable device. I want to thank each of you for joining us and spending part of your day right here. I found a piece by Genevieve Walker, who is a classically trained violinist, also a yoga teacher, and she toured for years with Krishna Das. And on this album for our Prelude this morning, she plays violin, viola, piano, and vocals. And there's some other instrumentalists on the album as well. And I selected this for Lent. The title of this is Saints. Loving this large singing bowl during Lent. So So this morning, for a moment of centering silence, let us relax into this moment, feel our own body, to notice the mind, to see where it goes, to return to inner space in this outer space, to reside in this moment with peace, calm, and blessing. We light our chalice this morning. Dawn, will you assist me with this? I'm going to guide you through the process. I realize this is your first time. So you'll find the matchstick in the holder. And we're just going to transfer the flame from the candle to the chalice. And then extinguish the match. Snuff out. May this flame we light remind us that every one of us can bring the light of love to the world. May this clear flame be a symbol that every heart can burn bright with joy, peace, and harmony. May the wisdom of the ages speak to us through this flame in us. Every one of us can be a blessing to the world. Well, during Lent, we've been using readings from this book by Henry Nouwen, You Are Beloved, Daily Meditations for Spiritual Living. And these readings come from April for Lent. And the title of this is The Many Rays of Hope. The Easter season is a time of hope. There still is fear. There is still a painful awareness of our shortcomings, but there's also light breaking through. Something new is happening, something that goes beyond the changing moods of our life. We can be joyful or sad, optimistic or pessimistic, tranquil or angry, but the solid stream of God's presence moves deeper than the small waves of our mind and hearts. Easter brings the awareness that God is present even when his presence is not directly noticed. Easter brings the good news that although things seem to get worse in the world, the evil one has already been overcome. Easter allows us to affirm that although God seems very distant, and although we remain preoccupied with many little things in our life, our Lord walks with us on the road and keeps explaining the scriptures to us. Thus, there are many rays of hope casting their light on our way through Lent. Well, due to the storm, there are not many of us here today, but we're still going to sing. We're not going to sing all 4 verses, but we'll do 2. Let's do the first verse, and what looks like the next best verse for today. Any suggestions? We're just going to do 2. I don't think there's a song about snow and mud. Let's do first and last. The rose verse sounds good. guys did great. So let's go ahead and light candles this morning for joy and concern for things going on in our life and our world. I'm lighting this first candle. There was a peace vigil yesterday in the Peace Park, or by the Peace Pole yesterday, for limiting assault rifles in the United States, the sale of assault rifles. So we had probably a dozen people at the vigil next door. But what it reminded me of was also the 20-year anniversary of the Iraq War. And several of us at the peace vigil yesterday remembered 20 years ago the peace vigils that were going on in Holton at the time. And many of us have participated in those. So this candle is just for the passage of time and as we move forward with peaceful means, with hope, dialogue, as we navigate, again, a world still filled with violence and complication. So this candle is for peaceful approach. And this candle is for Fred Griffith, and for Lee. He's been struggling with his foot issue. So the doctor has recommended that he stay off his feet really for the next month for healing of the infection. So it's going to be difficult to stay that long. So prayers this morning for both Fred and Lee, and we wish them the best in this healing process.
This is a follow-up candle to what Dave just said. I guess I'll call it a candle of care and help. And Fred wants to come back to church so badly. He has a wheelchair, and we just measured doorways, and they're not wide enough, these two, to get the wheelchair through. And little tiny Lee would have to back him up the ramp. So if we know that they're going to try to come, if we could have a couple of folks that could go to the car and help her pull him up the ramp, I think he can get into the sanctuary as far as the other door.
We can open here. We can open the,
Oh,
Yeah,
there's plenty
we've
of
done that
space.
before.
okay. And they have a leg attachment to keep that right foot out. So Lee's being a warden to keep them on track. So blessings that everything goes, and I think spirits are good. So, good, thank you for help.
Concern for all those victims of the terrible storms, tornadoes and things. Seen some terrible pictures on television. Wish people well and that they find a way through that very quickly. We've had some pretty extreme weathers also out in California and so on. So just putting my best wishes out there.
light this silent candle this morning. For prayers this morning, and for those who are not here this morning, who would like to be, this candle is for them. And for any names you'd like to include in our circle this morning. Charles, Elaine.
Fred and Lee.
This bowl of sand and candles holds our pain, our hopes, and our joy. For those concerns and those names mentioned this morning, we hold them in the light of love and compassion. May all beings everywhere with whom we are inseparably interconnected be fulfilled, awakened, and free. May there be peace in this world, may there be peace in our hearts, and may we dwell together as one on this blessed day. Amen, and blessed be. In honor of Women's History Month, we have a reading today by Olympia Brown, number 569. Olympia Brown was an American minister and suffragist. She was the first woman to be ordained as clergy with the consent of her denomination, Unitarian Universalist. So I will read the bold, if you read the italicized. Stand by this faith. Stand by this faith, work for it, and sacrifice for it.
There is nothing in all the world so important as to be loyal to this faith which has been placed before us, the loftiest of ideals,
which has comforted us in sorrow, strengthened us for noble duty, and made the world beautiful.
Do not demand immediate results, but rejoice that we are worthy to be entrusted with this great message.
That you are strong enough to work for a great true principle without counting the cost.
Go on finding ever new applications of these truths and new enjoyments in their contemplation, always trusting in the one God which ever lives and loves.
One of my go-to books in my library is George Carlin's classic, Napalm and Silly Putty. Probably because my generation grew up with Silly Putty as kids. It came in its own little plastic egg, probably so it wouldn't dry out. And you could make it into a ball, and then you could flatten it, and then you could stretch it like a stretchy pancake. Of course, the most amazing thing about it was you could flatten it and then press it onto a cartoon in the Saturday morning newspaper, and when you peeled it off, the cartoon came along with it. And then you could stretch it this way, that way. And napalm, that's a totally different story. So, from the book, here is our George Carlin opening quote for the day. There's a new telephone hotline in Los Angeles for people who are in denial. So far, no one has called. As we continue our series on belonging, one of the issues we keep running into is, what do we do when we encounter views or perspectives different from our own? Each one of us have our own opinion, but are we aware of how that opinion can sometimes limit our connection or relationship to the other person or persons who happen to have their own take on the topic? To a certain extent, each one of us are in denial or unaware of our identification to our own views. This is one of the primary goals of Cohen's book on belonging, is to help us become more self-aware of our own perspective. And in doing so, it will help us to be more aware of someone else's point of view or life experience. All in all, we are not that different from someone else who appears to do so, and our shared values are more similar than we might first realize. So this morning, the message is on key takeaways from Cohen's book. And I'm going to be reading from the chapter and guiding us through this final chapter in the book from Cohen. Cohen says, while the research on belonging uncertainty shows how easily belonging can be undermined, the science of situation crafting shows how empowered we all are to combat that uncertainty in ourselves and in others. The power of a situation is a power we all share. To use this power well, we can work at being astute observers of the situation. We can consider aspects of these situations that may be difficult for others, such as being the only one in the room who is a member of a particular group. We can become more attuned to the relations between people rather than so focused on the attributes within them. We must also be mindful about how situations may be triggering misperceptions and inappropriate reactions in us. Are we falling under this way of stereotype? Are we assuming we understand what's motivating someone's behavior? Are we acting defensively? We can gain some control over the situation, and especially of our own behavior in it, by being more aware of the forces shaping the situations and ourselves. Social policy and systemic change are paramount to addressing the crisis of belonging. But we can also each make the most of the situations before us. We can all support belonging for others and strengthen and protect our own belonging as well by devoting ourselves to situation crafting. The more we apply the insights and methods introduced in this study, the more positive results will elicit in an empowering feedback loop. We can look for opportunities to practice every day, even in the smallest corners of social life. So Cohen's looking at these larger issues facing society and looking at how do you tackle systemic changes. What I appreciate about this book is he brings it also around to that small group or personal level where sometimes we may not feel we can make significant change in those large systems. But what is encouraging is we can make changes in these smaller systems. So we're starting out four guidelines that support belonging before we get into the list in the bulletin that we'll be doing in a few minutes. So he talks about four guidelines, one being fight the FAE, which is fundamental attribution error. And if you remember what this is, it's an impulsive cognitive bias that leads us to see the behavior of others as emanating from some underlying essence, who a person is, rather than from the situation they are in. It's mistaking, it's blaming the person and ignoring the circumstances or the situation that person might be coming out of. And that tendency, our first human reaction, is to focus on blaming the person instead of understanding the circumstances. And that keeps coming up over and over again in this book on belonging, of ways to keep working with that. So of these guidelines that support belonging, there's 4 things to keep in mind as we're working. And number 2, he calls it get perspective. Get perspectives, or asking questions from the other person, which actually gets at the situation the person is coming out of, their background. It's working with that fundamental attribution error. And third, cultivate empathy, which again is working at that FAE issue. And 4 is something he calls eyes wide open. And he uses an example in the book. He calls it negotiating social traffic. Oftentimes here we talk about the social laboratory. Anytime people are together in the same space, we're navigating personal relationships, the social uncertainty, belonging uncertainty, and it's like a laboratory. In this case, he calls it navigating social traffic. And he talks about his father was teaching him how to drive, and I'll read this from the paragraph. Keep in mind the potential to cause a social accident, no matter how good our intentions. When my father taught me to drive, he'd continually tell me that the driver's most important ally isn't a particular skill, but being alert. If you spot trouble coming, he'd say, or anticipate its potential, given circumstantial road conditions, you can avoid almost all accidents. You're most vulnerable to what you don't see, he'd say. The factors influencing the conditions of social traffic are often invisible, making our daily lives filled with the potential for unintended conflicts over belonging. It's unlikely we'll be able to avoid all or even most of these conflicts, but the more we stay alert, the better navigators of situations we'll become, and crafters of situations as well. So it reminded me of defensive driving in driver's ed. We would talk about eyes wide open, and if you need to get out of the way or avoid an incident driving, defensive driving could help eliminate a lot of fender benders that can occur driving on a highway. So he's making the same kind of point to navigating social traffic of just the observations, eyes wide open, and knowing the timing of what to say, when to avoid, when to move. It's a reading of the room, eyes wide open, and I like the image of social traffic. So if you look at your bulletin, you'll see 8 categories of key takeaways in Cohen's book. So we're just going to go briefly through 8 of these and not spend a whole lot of time explaining each one. And Cohen says, by staying attuned to these insights, the basis of a situational literacy will be better able to engage in this core set of practices for building belonging in our daily lives. So, number one is ask questions and listen to the answers. Appreciating how much we might discover about people and their circumstances drives curiosity. In turn, showing genuine curiosity about others is one of the most powerful bond builders. And by getting people's perspective, rather than guessing at it, we are better positioned to provide the support they actually need. You can't ask too many questions. It goes back to our 5 agreements of not making assumptions, clarifying, asking questions, is essentially this first point in Cohen's checklist. And number 2 is also give your perspective. The first point, you're actually getting the perspective from the other person by asking questions, follow up. And so this is a complement. The second part in that conversation, you're also getting your perspective out there. So the other person has a better understanding of where you're coming from, what your thoughts are. So it's get perspective and give perspective. Third point is be civil. Respect quickly de-escalates tension in a conversation, no matter how difficult the conversation or the topic, content might be. The key is to be able to emotionally breathe, pause, hold, as you're listening to someone, getting their perspective. And before you reply and give your perspective, you have to be able to do it in a civil manner, where the exchange, that keeps it contained at a level where you can truly communicate. The ideas, the exchange, back and forth, is going to flow with less tension, less anxiety. And the longer the conversation goes, if you can hold it at that level, you relax into the conversation more. What initially our reaction might have the tension and anxiety in it, hanging with it, pacing it, not saying too much until you are in a space, a personal space, where you can respond in a right speech. Going back to one of our 5 agreements, to be impeccable with your word, speak with integrity, speak with civility, right speech. A most difficult practice, depending on the social traffic going on and the one-on-one conversations. But I think it helps to have some of these reminders or slogans or agreements so organized, or we can pull up when we need them. And these 8 key takeaways are, again, more examples of some of those strategies that a person can use in difficult social traffic to navigate it and to cultivate that sense of connection and belongingness in those interactions. And moving on to number 4 is affirm. So in these conversations, what you're trying to do is look for something of similar similar values, common ground, and use that as a starting point to bring the conversation closer together, and then keep asking questions, getting perspective, to expand from that initial, whatever you've identified as common ground or as a starting point. And that in itself helps ease into the conversation of, oh, all of a sudden, you might be surprised how much you do have in common in some of these conversations. And the connection, or it stabilizes the base of that conversation simply from starting to identify or affirming the other individual and these shared points. 5, avoid authoritarian language. And Cohen says, recall that just saying, I think, before we give our opinion conveys that we understand we are speaking from just one point of view, our own, and that there may be other points of view out there. So just by saying, I think, and fill in the blank, is a good preparatory or initial statement that opens it up to more possibilities, and that you're not totally identified with your position, which comes across as being authoritarian or not much room for discussion or change if you come across as if your mind is already made up or that you have the answers. So Cohen says that ambivalence, we can also openly express our ambivalence on issues which we all have. Most of these important matters may or may not be confirmed, or they're up for debate, up for exploration. So ambivalence, as Unitarians, we're famous for being ambivalent. It's a healthy process of critique. It goes back to the 5th agreement of being skeptical but learn to listen. It's building in the ambivalence and a non-authoritarian approach. And just the process of asking questions, of getting perspective is so key. We can still give perspective, but spend just as much time with exploring what do we have in common, where are our connections. And 6, you can also use the non-verbal channel or body language while you're having a discussion, while you're navigating the traffic, when you're talking to someone, especially when you're listening. All you have is non-verbal body language, is all they're picking up on. So to be aware of maintaining a connection, positive, affirming feedback that's non-verbal. And there's different ways of doing that, but that's worth the time exploring. If you're talking more than 50% of the time, you've crossed a line where you may want to cut back and switch to non-verbal. Okay? And number 7, handle yourself with care. And Cohen uses the example of his father with the driving instructions. My father thought that being an aware driver required foremost being in the right headspace. If you're tired, angry, or stressed, get off the road and restore yourself. Take a pit stop. At the very least, question your mind more. The same lesson applies to social life. So it's important to be in the right space yourself before you engage in a difficult, complicated social traffic or difficult conversation. If you're not having a good day or upset, it's best to, in that case, you just may need to reschedule the talk for another time. I said, can we talk about this later? That's an example of handling yourself with care, of noticing how you're feeling, what you're thinking, and to not overextend, to not try to do too much, or take too much time. It's like, you are curious to find out more information. It may require a long conversation, and if it does, you need to make sure that you're up for it and have support from someone else there in the conversation, or if it's a one-on-one, to make sure, is this the right time or place to have this conversation? And lastly, craft your situations with care. I'm going to go ahead and read what Cohen has to say about this. One way we can craft our daily situations is simply to be a gatekeeper for the multitude of social influences on our own life and lives of those we care for. Cultivating a rich social life, staying in touch with family and friends, finding ways to express our values, such as by devoting ourselves to purposes larger than ourselves, and striving to be mindful of our own minds through the various psychological timeouts and calisthenics that Cohen actually has examples of some of these tools to use when you're in a conversation. All of those tools help strengthen us in our quest to foster connection and belonging, which is the bottom line. It defines the health or functionality or dysfunction of a group, of how well we can create situations that are going to promote this level of communication, just how the situation is crafted or set up with agreements, certain standards, shared values, the right space, be it in a circle, a warm space, a safe space, a sanctuary, where the space that we've created helps to support functional conversations and work that needs to be done, can be done. If we can keep all of these things in mind that are in play. So in conclusion, I'm going to read what Cohen has at the end of this chapter, and that's going to sum up our key takeaways for this morning. Cohen says, awareness and good habits are cultivated by practice. No matter how much we know, we are always learning how to apply that knowledge in novel situations. It's all too easy to forget lessons and fail to see their relevance in the heat of a moment. For someone who studies psychology, a friend once told to me in the midst of an argument, you can sure be clueless sometimes. In my defense, I think cluelessness is a human default that we regress to unless we continually practice applying what we know. As even the late, great peacemaker Nelson Mandela said, I am not a saint unless you think a saint is a sinner who keeps on trying. We can all give and receive help from one another as we seek to strengthen belonging. But we'll often fail to improve things as much as we hope. Small gestures and brief experiences of connection can have surprising effects. We can inspire. I'm hoping some of those 8 takeaways going to include those in the support page this week with a little, a short blurb on each one of those. Because I do think they're helpful tools to use and to work with, some more than others, perhaps. And hoping with the Cohen book to add some of these tools, the toolbox that we've been putting together. And at the end of the year, we'll review some of this content so we can have a shared vocabulary here as a group and actually use some of these ideas, the ones that are helpful. 5 agreements have been certainly an example of that, and our 7 principles. And I'm hopeful that some of the content from this Belonging series will also be tools we can use as we move forward and explore ourselves as a group. We're going to go ahead and close the service. And we could do a little Q&A if you want to after the camera is off. We may do that. But let's extinguish the chalice. And now as we extinguish the chalice, may the love of truth guide you, the warmth of love hold you, and the spirit of peace bless you. May we leave this morning a little different than we were when we arrived. It's good to have been here today. Snow, slush, and cold. Amen.
We want to thank everybody for tuning in today. If you'd like to show your support, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel if you're not already subscribed, and help us out by sharing this message by clicking the share button. If you'd like to make a monetary donation to the UU Church Houlton, there is a link to our online donations in the video description down below. And again, thank you so much and have a blessed day.